So now, the reason why I decided to go ahead and do it this way is because the other times when I would try to create a different meeting, you'd have to like log in and have that code and copy it, so on and so forth. And at the end of the day, I found that this was just an easier way to do it. So you can go ahead and bookmark that. I've already bookmarked mine at the top up here so that it's the same one every time. All right. I placed that under the Home tab, right? Chime link, right? I placed it under the modules. It's even on the syllabus page and under the announcements, okay? All right, so we go to the announcements now. Let's go ahead and talk about this new assignment structure that I have here, right? So we're gonna be transitioning and we're moving into something else. We're having to pivot. So I've adjusted a lot of the due dates, which we'll go over in just a moment, all right? We're gonna also put some other materials on the Canvas shell to help you understand and make sure that we understand what we're doing. We're going to still have the same mix of quizzes and projects, but we're not going to be able to be together in the class to make the most of our time. So I've made a few changes. I'm going to go over the PowerPoints during the regularly scheduled class, and I'm going to do what we're doing now, record them, and if you need closed captioning, it's on there, right? The projects and quizzes are going to be the same, but instead of being due on a Tuesday or a Thursday, they're all going to be due on the Sunday of the week that they were due. So I've changed the dates on that, right? We'll go over it in just a minute. For each of the the practice projects that we were going to go over in class, I'm going to make a video, put the video on YouTube so that it's in 1080p, and then put the link for the practice project right there together with it. So, and I'll show you what I mean in just a moment. But basically, I'm using YouTube because YouTube embeds the closed captioning in it. You can make the videos in high def, and you can use YouTube on every device you have with no issues, right? So that's going to show you how to do each of the projects, and then I will reserve time after each of the lectures for us to go over those if you have time. So in other words, today we won't do it, but on Thursday, when we go over the lecture, if you have any issues or whatever, I'll reserve time at the end of class for you to be able to tell me about that, all right? On April 5th and April 19th, you're going to have to do a progress report where one of the members of your team is going to represent you and give a progress report on your work. So just like I'm doing right now, where we log into Amazon Chime, and then you tell me what you're going to do. I'm showing you my screen to show you what I'm doing. You're going to show me your screen so that we can see your progress report, and then you're going to explain where you are. Now, if your video is not capable of doing that, you can record yourself on your iPad going over it and then upload that for your progress report. But we'll as we get a little closer to that, we'll go over it better, all right? You're going to continue to work on your projects. Cole, you asked this question earlier. You're going to continue to work on your projects with one big exception. Instead of presenting your project to the entire class, which is what we had planned to do, you're going to have to basically create like a voiceover video of your project. So if it's a website or some sort of animation, you're going to have to go through that and explain it as a voiceover video. If it was a hands-on project, like you were creating some sort of mock-up or a model, then you're going to have one of your team members create a video using your iPad or your phone, okay? All right. And then we're going to develop your presentation skills so that you can do that on video. I'll give you some examples of how that works, what some best practices are, so on and so forth. And then finally, I'm always going to leave at least 10 minutes for Q&A in every class, right? So while I want you to give me your questions, if you have any other questions, I'll always leave at least 10 minutes at the end of class for us to be able to do what we have to do, okay? And so Jared asked the question, can only one team member present instead of all? It might be better that way. I don't have a problem with how you present. I am interested in you doing the work. Who presents it will be entirely up to the audience. We don't have, it's not a dialogue class, so there's no requirement for you to do a presentation. It's just this is a project management class, so you have to actually deliver a project, and that's why we have to end up doing it this way. Does that answer your question, Jared? Okay. All right. Gotcha. All right. Any questions, comments so far? Sam, what should we do in case our project is not happening, like the promotional video? Okay. So you're going to have to pivot, right? What that means is you're going to have to find something else. Like, can you do a promotional video for something else? I don't have a problem with you continuing on the way you were, right? You don't have to go and do a new project charter or anything like that. You can just pivot and do a promotional video for something else. I do think that you probably need to practice a little more social distancing. And by the way, some of you are easier to distance than others, right? Anyway, I don't have a problem with however you want to do it, right? I'm going to be very flexible here. I'm going to be very easy to get along with. I just need you to produce something so that we can say we made a project in project management class. Do you follow what I'm saying? Okay. So for instance, like you asked, what happens if your project you were doing has a physical component, but you can't meet because of social distancing? If you can figure out a way to do it where you don't have to meet back and forth, I'm okay with that. If it was an actual physical project, then maybe what you can do is one of you build the project, the other one of you do the video, the other do a presentation, right? However you want to do it. I'm okay with whatever y'all choose to do. I'm going to be very flexible here. All right. So far, so good? All right. On that subject, on what we have for the new assignment structure before we move on, do you folks have any questions? Do you want me to go over a little bit more of it so that you understand it better, or are we all on the same page here? Okay. We're all good? Right? Okay. All right. Yes, project 3 is due Sunday. Right? No, I don't know. Let's go look and see. So let's go to the assignment window, right? And so you've got all of your projects here. And project 3, which says it's due on March 22nd, I probably need to push that back. So let's push that one back, okay? And yes, all of the due dates are moved to Sunday, right? So for instance, the due dates that are on there are actually legit. So I'm going to take this guy here, and I'll give you a little bit of extra time on this one, right? Okay. Because I haven't had a chance to show you how to do that. I'm going to go ahead and take this one, and I will push it back to the 29th. All right. So that'll give you a little bit of extra time. Okay. All right. And we'll make sure that we have it all together. All right. So does that answer your question, Riley?
Professor?
I'll get this. Huh?
Hi, I'm
Good.
Juan. I'm having a question. Like, so for example, with the quiz, I had a quiz graded and like my grade dropped a lot. And I don't know if that is move or because it says that it was already done.
Okay, so we're not on quizzes yet. We'll get there, and you ask that question when we get there.
All right, perfect.
All
Yeah.
right. Okay.
Thank you.
But I am going to answer it. I want to make sure that we actually get there. Okay.
Perfect. Thank you.
All right. And Cole, how do you know what it shows for everybody? If you know what everybody else's grades are, then we got a bigger problem than what we're doing, right? So, you know what assuming does, right?
You are
Makes an
actually
ass
able
out
to
of
see
you and
it.
me.
Yeah, you are able to see it, and you can see the range of the scores and also the average of the score.
Yes, I know that, right? So let's go ahead and answer these questions one at a time. Sam, you said, do we need to redo our assignments in case we are pivoting and or changing our project. So are you asking me redoing the practice problems? Because the only one we have done so far is the project charter, right?
Yeah, I'm asking whether we need to redo that one.
No, you do not need to redo your project charter. Okay. Tom says the same points apply for early submission. Yes, if you turn it in early, then I will give you extra points for that. All right, but I will double check and make sure that we've got that. I don't remember what I told you on each one of them, but we'll get there. Okay. So now with that in mind, let's come over here and take a look at the quizzes. All right. The reason why I pushed this back to March 29th is because you actually do have a quiz coming up this weekend on March 22nd. And so rather than making you do the project and the quiz in the same weekend, I pushed the project back to March 29th. I just forgot to make that adjustment, okay? So, yes, I know that because the original due date was last week, it gave everybody a 0. But when you log in and take the quiz, it's actually going to fix that, and it should boost your grade, okay? You got me? All right. So far, so good?
Excellent, yes.
Okay. Does that answer your question, Cole? We're all good? Okay. Now, I know right now it is screwed up, and yes, you are correct. When you go and moderate, okay, yes, it's going to be open all weekend. It'll be open from Friday to Sunday night. So you'll have Friday morning all the way to Sunday night, and I'm going to give you 150 minutes for that, right? Okay, so we'll get there. So far, so good? All right. Any other questions about the quiz coming up? Okay. All right. So same format though, right? It's going to be on lectures 4, 5, and 6. And I'm going to make sure that you fully understand it. So we're going to start on PowerPoint number 6 this weekend, right? Yes, the quiz is open, everything, right? Yes, it is. Okay. So I do think I did say that, didn't I? Did I say that you couldn't use a calculator? Yes. So let me edit that, right? All right. Let me take that off. So thank you for pointing that out, right? Let me fix that real quick. Good job. Okay. All right. Now, on the bottom here, it says access code. I'm going to change that, and I will give you the access code in class when we have class on Thursday. That is my way. No, it's not, Cole. That is my way of making sure that you actually show up on Thursday, because, you know, I got to have you showing up. And I will make sure that you fully understand that. All right. It is not all multiple choice. I think on this one, I think I have 20 or 25 multiple choice and 1 or 2 short answer questions. All right. But I will reevaluate that and see if I need to make them all multiple choice. I'm not going to require lockdown browser. As a matter of fact, if you Google the answer and you come up with it, I'll be okay with that. It won't do you any good because you won't be able to find the answers to the questions that I have. All right, so then your quizzes, right? Quizzes are going to be worth the same amount. On this particular quiz, I actually dropped the lowest, right? What do you mean unlimited time, Jeremy? Like just open-ended, like you can start it on Friday and you get till Sunday afternoon to finish it? Because if that's what you mean, the answer is no.
Gotcha. Sorry, Joe.
Okay, so it's going to be 150 minutes. Normally it's 75. I'm going to give you double time on it, right? Okay, right? I'm going to give you double time on it, and then we can move forward from that. Okay, all right. Cole, I would ask you to pay attention to what's on the screen in front of you instead of bouncing back and forth and looking at the Canvas shell. All right, and then we can move forward from there. Okay? All right. Now, to answer your question, though, the answer is yes. You are still dropping the 2 lowest quizzes. So if the quizzes screw you up, it's project management. So I want to grade you on the projects more than I do on the quizzes. You follow me? So that's why I'm going to drop the 2 lowest quizzes for you to give you a chance to boost that quiz score. Does that make sense? Make sense? Okay. All right. So with that in mind, let's take a look at some of the other things that you're going to have to do, right? So under your projects, right, each of these, even though they are published, they do not count towards your final grade. So we are going to, after your quiz, we're going to come back together next week and we're going to look at a network diagram and the Gantt chart. Now we're going to go over network diagrams today and Thursday. In other words, I'm going to lecture on them so you can see what they need to look like. But I'm going to show you how to do a network diagram and a Gantt chart next week. Then you will have the rest of that time to be able to actually pull one together. So you're going to do the network diagram and the Gantt chart for your project. I'm going to show you a mock project for these two. You're going to do your actual project on project 3. We'll do the same thing again for the dashboard, where the dashboard will be used for your progress reports. So far, so good? Okay. And then you mentioned, as you said, about the quizzes. It says I'm dropping the lowest 2 quiz scores. So yes, that's exactly right. And then your final paper in your project is the same as it was before. All right? Okay. Questions, comments, or concerns about how we're going to pivot on this, right? So far, so good? All right. Okay. So if that's it, then we're going to dive into PowerPoint number 6, the lecture for number 6, and okay, which is what I'll have. I don't want that. I want this. There we go. All right. Okay. Okay. Now, as we move forward with this particular set, it will be a little more difficult for me to be able to see your conference or to see your questions or whatever if I make this full screen. So what I'm going to do is leave the PowerPoint section over here, but I'm going to enlarge this to as big a part of the screen as I can get it. All right. So I need you guys to tell me, can you still see what we need to see over here? Because if I make it the full screen PowerPoint, then it's going to take up both of my screens and I won't be able to see the video conference that we have on the second screen. So if this works for you where we can do it this way, then I'm going to continue like this. Can everybody see on their screen what we're doing right here, right? So Tom says he can see the PowerPoint. Riley's good. Janice is good, right?
I'm good
Okay,
as well.
so, all right, so it looks like we're good then. So we're going to continue on with what we're doing, right? Okay, good job. All right, all right. So now this module is all about developing your project plan. So we looked at planning. We talked about how you develop the why you develop the plan. Now we're going to look at actually developing it. And that's what chapter 6 or lecture number 6 is all about, okay? So in the grand scheme of things, this is where we are. We've looked at defining the project, looked at how we make an estimate. Now we're going to develop a project network, right? The reason why we make a project plan is so that we can look at how everything fits together. Remember that we had defining and planning together as one phase. And so a project plan, if here's where we are, the project plan will help us to document all those things that we need to define the project while simultaneously telling us where we're going to get the source for the materials and the source for the information. So our project plan will help us to define where we want to be and how we're going to get there. So far, so good? Okay. Now, here's why we do this, or here's what the idea of the project plan is going to take care of. We're going to look at the high level. We're going to look at who's on the project team. We're going to look at the cost and scheduling, look at some of the risk and change management stuff, right? All right. And then finally, we're going to look at supplier and contract management. All right. A project plan, and this is one that you need to put a star on. So slide 6-6 is going to be important. A project plan will produce three things: a project management plan for each of the functional areas, and a way to update everything. So one more time, your project plan is going to give you your overall project management plan, how things fit together. The management plan for each of the functional areas. What is accounting going to do? What is finance going to do? What is marketing going to do? And then the ongoing project management update as needed. All right. Now, the way we do this is in a network diagram, which I'm going to show you a picture of in just a moment. So the network diagram is like a flow chart, and it graphically represents how each of the pieces fit together, how they're interdependent, what the start and finish times are, so on and so forth. Okay, so the project network is always going to look at the critical path, and the critical path is the longest path through the entire network. The critical path is the longest path through the entire network. The reason why we do this project network diagram is so that we can have the labor and scheduling together, tells us about our cash flow, what activities are critical, and helps us to stay on plan. Questions so far? Right? All right. Okay. All right. Now, this is what the project network diagram is going to look like. It flows from left to right, and it has a unique identifier number or letter, A, B, C, D, so on and so forth, along with a description of what each of those pieces is going to look like. All right. Don't worry about this particular diagram. We're going to look at another one in depth in just a moment. Now, one of the things that I do want to show you, right, and so for this one, I'm actually going to start from this, right? So from this particular slide, these terms that are on slide 6-9, I want you to fully understand them, okay? So an activity is any element that requires time. An activity is any element that requires time, right? So you're going to actually have a question on your test that says a blank is any element that requires time. You're going to fill it in with activity. Now, there are three basic kinds of activities, right? Or there are four basic kinds. There's the straight activity that I just told you about. The next is what's called a merge activity. And that's one that has two or more preceding activities that go into it. So in our example, activity D, right, has A and B flowing into it. So that's where A and B merge. A burst activity is any activity that has two or more coming from it. So this is where a burst of activity comes from. So B, in this case, is a burst activity. And then finally, we have parallel activities, which are those that can be done at the same time if necessary, because they're independent of one another. A and B are independent, as are D and C. So therefore, A and B are parallel, as are D and C. All right? Any questions so far? Okay. Yes, Jared, I will go back, right? And when we have I'm going to try to have a review on Thursday about this. So you need to know, and I can't star them right now, but I will try to do that, or I will at least make sure that you know. Okay. So for instance, maybe on Thursday, you can have the PowerPoint pulled up on your iPad or print them out or whatever. And as we go over it, I'll tell you, make sure you have a star on this one. Okay, that way you'll know. Does that help? Okay, so for instance, on this one, I can tell you flat out that you need to know what the critical path is. All right, and the part of that, first off, a path is the sequence of connected or dependent activities. The critical path, right, is the longest part that allows for the completion of all activities. All right, so the critical path is the part that allows for the completion of all activities. It is also the shortest expected time that the entire project can be created. And finally, any delay on the critical path will delay completion of the entire project. Okay? So, in this example, if A and B, right, are required to do D, and then A and B take longer than C, the critical path would be A, B, D. Don't worry about knowing this thing right here, right now. When we get together and I show you how to do this next week, it's going to be a little clearer what we have to do. All right? Right now, for the exam, what you need to know is this definition of critical path. So here's some examples of how I might ask that on the test, right? Okay. The blank indicates the shortest expected time in which the project can be completed. And the fill in the blank would be critical path, right? Or I might say delays along the blank will delay completion of the entire project, and you would indicate critical path. So that's how I would ask questions from this slide. Straightforward, slam dunk, knock it out of the park. All right? Now, usually there are two approaches to doing a project network diagram. Yes, Tom, the path does show how each of those activities are connected. So let's go back and take a look, or we can take a look at this one, right? And so you can see that you have to do A before you can do B, C, and D. So it shows how each of them are connected. Now, it does not tell you why they are connected. It simply shows you how and that they are. Does that make sense? Okay. All right. Now, there's two approaches to this. There's called activity on node and activity on arrow. The nodes are the squares. The arrows, of course, are the arrows, right? And so with that in mind, right, we're going to focus on this one to the exclusion of the activity on arrow. All right. So we're going to look at here rather than saying the activities are there. All right. Now, there's 8 simple rules, right, for doing a network diagram. First, it flows left to right. Simple, easy stuff, right? Okay. The second is that any activity cannot begin until all the predecessors are done. Third, the arrows indicate precedence and flow, so it flows left to right. So this is what you were saying. Do the activities, do the path shows the activities are connected? And the answer is yes. All right. Every activity has to have a unique identifier number. Okay. So you want me to go back to 11? Okay. Did you have a question about that one, Cole? Okay. So I crossed it out because we're concentrating on activity on node. I'm not going to go through the rules for activity on arrow. Okay. Does that answer your question? That's right. You don't need to know that. And Tom asked, does the identifying number correlate with importance? It does not correlate with importance. It correlates with the order that they have to be done. So you'll have a start node, and then you have activity 1, 2, or 3. Well, 1 has to be done before 2, right? So on and so forth. So it's the first thing that you're going to tackle, and then you move left to right. Okay? So it doesn't necessarily indicate importance. The importance comes from that thing that's on the critical path. All right? Now, bullet point 5, an activity identification number must be greater than that of any predecessor. So that's what we were talking about. All right. And then 6, looping is not allowed. I'll show you an example of a loop in just a moment. Conditional statements, if this, then that, those are not allowed. and then you have common start and stop nodes. Okay, so here's some examples of what we're saying, right? A comes before B, B comes before C. So you can't do B until you do A, and you can't do C until you do B. So that then corresponds with the idea that that the activity number must be greater than any of the predecessors, right? In addition, when we look at X, Y, and Z, we can see that X is a burst activity, and so X has to come before Y and Z. Y and Z are that can be done at the same time. So who can tell me what we call Y and Z? What kind of activities are these? It's a node, that's correct, right? Y and Z are nodes, but what kind of activities are they? Okay, all right. So if we come back to slide 9, right, we've got activity, merge, burst, and parallel, right? So then these, Y and Z, would be parallel activities. Good job, okay? All right, so number 14, right? What is M? Burst, parallel, or merge? Great job. It kind of says it right there in C, right? So, okay. And then finally, we look here, we see X and Y are both burst activities. Z and double A are merge activities, right? But here's where I want you to be careful. It is not a safe assumption for you to assume that X and Y are parallel and then Z and A are parallel. It is not a safe assumption to do that. So we're going to come back to that at a later date, right? So don't worry about it right now. Okay, so let me give you an example of how we actually use this. Here's an automated, we're going to work, I'm not going to belabor the point because we're going to work on this very thing when we come back together next week. But right now, right, you can see that we have an automated picking system for a warehouse. And so this warehouse, as you can see, has activities A through H. It tells you what your predecessors are, and it tells you what your description is. So when we start building it together, we can see that A is define requirements. We have to define the requirements before we can assign the team and design the hardware. So then we put this together, and B and C allow us to do that. So we have to do A before we can do B and C. Therefore, A becomes a predecessor activity for B and C. Does everybody understand that? Or are we all on the same page? Because this is a very important point that I want you to see. Okay, so you want me to go back over that? Okay, so when we look here, okay, we see that we have activities A through H. A is that we have to define the requirements for the project first. So far, so good, right? Okay. There is no predecessor activity or preceding activity because A is the first thing we do. But before we can assign the team and design the hardware, we have to define the requirements. That's what the preceding activity part over here means. So what that means is that we need to burst that out so that B and C follow A. So A becomes a burst activity. B and C can then be done at the same time, so they're parallel activities. So far, so good? Okay. Okay, so y'all got that? So Tom asked, is it important in order to understand what activities must be prioritized and done before taking the next activity? And the answer is absolutely, okay? That's what this is for. So we know these are the things that have to be done first. That helps us to put each of them into our network diagram. Make sense, Tom? Okay, so we're all on the same page then, okay? Good job. Now, when we put the full-blown network diagram together, we get something that looks like this. We are actually going to build this in Excel a week from today. So I'm not going to belabor the point too much, but I do want to point out to you that we have A as a burst activity, right? And we have H as a, what would we call this? Is this a burst, merge, or parallel activity? That's a merge activity. Good job, Cole. Right? Okay. So what would we call D, E, and F then? That's right. And so then what do we call C? There you go. Now, y'all need to understand that because I'm going to have a network diagram on the test and ask you to identify the burst activities, the parallel activities, and the merge activity. You got me? So if you do not understand that, then you need to let me know so that I can walk you through that one more time. All right? Okay, so we have a question or somebody just logging in again? It looks like just logging in again. Okay. So Cole asked what G is, right? Is G any of those things above? Is it burst? Is it parallel? Is it merge? No. It's just an activity, right? So it's none of those things. It's just a simple activity across the line. Okay? And the same with B. Okay? Good job. Now, with that in mind, right, we're going to introduce you to a concept in just a moment that's called a hammock activity, but I'll point out now that F is a hammock activity as well. And it's called a hammock activity because it kind of hangs like a hammock and it stretches between 2 points like this, right? This can be done anytime. So it's not really that important. It's done by a separate department. So you don't have to do it at the same time as you're doing everything else. It can be done parallel to D and E, and it's a hammock activity. So it kind of hangs by itself, okay? All right. Now when we take a look at the computational process, this is going to be as confusing as you can possibly be at this moment. Until you see this actually done in real life, you're not going to understand this, all right? And so I don't expect you to do that. All I want to know is that we've gone over it so that I can refer back to it when we come back next week, right? So we're going to do what's called a forward pass and a backward pass. The forward pass tells you the earliest that the project can be finished. The forward pass tells you the earliest that the project can be finished, right? The forward pass tells you it's the earliest that the project can be finished. The backward pass tells you the latest that the project must be finished. The backward pass tells you, let me say that differently. The backward pass tells you the latest that you must start in order to finish it on time. So I don't expect you to know that right now. We will come back to it next week, right? But it answers these questions. The forward pass says, how soon can we start an activity? How soon can it be finished? And how soon can we finish the project? The backward pass says, how late can we start the activity? How late must it be finished? And which ones are on the critical path? Okay. Now, with that in mind, we're going to come again, we're going to come back and we're going to put that information into a network diagram on Excel. But what we're doing is we're simply taking the early start plus the duration to get the early finish. And then we carry that through the whole thing. Not going to go over this a lot today. Again, we're going to do this on Tuesday. All right. And this is how we do it. So we don't really need that computation. We don't need that one either. And we don't need this because I'm going to go back over it ad nauseum. What I do want you to know, right? You need to know, and you'll notice that it's on there, you need to know how to calculate total slack. Now, for this upcoming test, this is not going to be on there because I have not had a chance to go over it with you. And it's a rather complex part, okay? As a matter of fact, not only am I going to go over it with you on Thursday, but I'm also going to make a video to make sure that you fully understand it, all right? Or I will find one and put it up there. So what you need to know for the test, you don't have to know the calculations, but you do need to know for the test that the total slack is the amount of time it can be delayed and not delay the entire project. Total slack, right? So I'll take this star and I'll pull it up here instead. Total slack tells us the amount of time that an activity can be delayed and not delay the entire project. So far, so good, right? All right. Free slack is the amount of time the activity can be delayed before the parallel activity has to start. Okay? And we do that so that it allows us to do scheduling of our resources. Okay? And then finally, let's look at this part. All right? Slide 6-27. Yes, Tom, that's exactly right. It's to help you schedule your resources and your men and materials to make sure that you've got everything you need. All right? So here's things you need to know about the critical path. As it says, it's the network path that has the least slack. As a matter of fact, if it's the true critical path, the slack will be 0, okay? If it's the critical path, both the free slack and the total slack will be 0, Cole, right? So when you're looking at the critical path, the slack on there is going to be 0. It's also the longest path through the network. I'm telling you, write it down, okay? Do you want me to write it down? Okay. Okay. All right. Here. Okay. All right. Also, the critical path is the longest path through the entire activity network. Okay. It's, even though it's the longest path, it's the shortest expected time that the entire project can be completed. Okay. It's the longest path, but the shortest time the entire project can be completed. Let me explain that a little bit. Let's say that we're building a road between here and Orlando. The best path for us to go between here and Orlando goes through the middle of the swamp. All right. So in order for us to get from here to Orlando, we have to build a road that's not necessarily going to be the shortest path. As a matter of fact, it's probably going to be the long way around it because it's going to be less expensive for us to go through this or around the swamp than go through the swamp. And so instead, and I shouldn't say swamp, I should say Everglades, right? So to go through the glades. However, it's still the shortest expected time for us to complete the project. It is not the shortest path, but it's the shortest expected time for completion. Now, the critical path is also where you put your best people because it has to be done on time and under budget or the entire project will fall apart. If you have to pay extra, then this is where you're going to put it. If other managers are asking you to borrow equipment or people or whatever, this is where you do not want to give them up. You need to put more people on your team. And if you don't have time to monitor all the activities, look at the critical path and it'll tell you whether you're on time or under budget. Okay? All right. So, slide 28, right? This idea of network sensitivity. Network sensitivity, as it says, is the likelihood that the original path is going to change once the project is initiated. Now, I'm going to show you how to calculate all of that when we come together on Thursday and Tuesday, but right now this is where we are. All right. And a schedule that has only one critical path is considered to be insensitive. What that means is that if you only have one critical path and you have plenty of slack, then you don't have to worry about changes in your schedule because you're still going to get it done on time. All right. Okay. Now, slide number 29. There are some practical things you need to think about. The first one is called a network logic error or a loop. Think about your activity numbering. Like if it's going to be, if you use letters, then you're going to run out of letters if you have more than 26 of your activities. You're going to use, calendar dates and so on and so forth. Let's talk about this idea right here. I'm going to add to this, right? Somewhere in your notes, I want you to write this down. Generally, when you're scheduling your projects, we consider that there's only 360 days in a year, right? So it's 360 days in a year. So far, so good. We also assume that there's 30 days in a month, right? 12 months per year. This allows us to have equal numbering systems and equal date systems rather than trying to figure out which date we're on, all right? So generally what people will do is they will split it up into periods rather than months. So it's period 1, period 2, period 3, so that we don't get that incorrect, right? We also assume, unless otherwise stated, that you're only going to work 5 days per week, right? Okay, 5 days per week. So 360 days in a year, 30 days in a month, 12 months per year, 5 days per week, right? So far, so good? All right. Generally, we monitor activities in days unless it's a very short duration project, which we can switch to hours at that time. All right. Now, I told you I was going to give you an example of what a network logic error is, and that's what this guy right here is. This is called an illogical loop, right? So remember when I said looping was not allowed, this is what I meant. You can't do B until you do A, but you can't do A until C is done, but you can't do C until you do B. So where do you start? Where would you start on this particular project? A, but you can't do A until C is done, Janice. You can't do B until A is done, Cole. Start in the middle. So you're going to start right here? Right. You can't tell, and that's why it's confusing, which is why this is an illogical loop, right? You can actually write logical errors for computer code that'll just make the computer run forever and it'll never find an answer. So we try to keep those out of our network diagrams, right? Okay. So this particular piece is, I took this from Microsoft Project, and we simply put each one of the pieces in, and as you can see, Microsoft Project will give us our critical path written in blue across the middle here, right? This is another sheet from there that's a Gantt chart, right? So it gives me my bar chart here that tells me when each piece can be done, all right? Okay, now, putting it in this way, it'll actually create each one of those pieces for me and tell me what I need to do, create my bar chart, okay? And so what we want to do, there's some other things we can do, like laddering or using lags and things like this. And so let me give you an example of what laddering is, right? Let's say that we wanted to build a pipeline or a sewer pipe between the International Business Center and the Hornlake, right? So we want to dig a trench, right? And let's say it's 300 feet. So one of the ways that you can speed up the process is that if you dig the trench first and you continue on, while you're digging the next leg of the trench, you can have someone come in and lay the pipe. Then once you're done with the third leg, right, You can have someone come in and lay the pipe for the second leg while the first person is filling over the top of the first one. And so this is laddering that process so that instead of you having to take, let's say each one of these activities takes us a day. If we were to say we're going to dig the trench first, then lay the pipe first, next, and then do the refill, that would take us 9 days. So trenching times 3, laying the pipe times 3, refilling times 3, total of 9 days. But as we have here, we've actually reduced that time to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 days. So we've been able to shave 4 days off of our process. Does everybody follow what I just said? Right? Or let me say it differently. Does anybody not follow that and you want me to go back over it? So you want me to go back over it, Cole? Okay, so let's say, for instance, right, that we say T for trench times 3, because each one of the activities we're going to assume takes us 1 day. So if we have to lay the trench times 3, that's 3 days. So T times 3 equals 3, right? Laying the pipe times 3 equals 3. And then refilling times 3, okay? So the total is going to equal 9 days. So far, so good? All right, now, if, however, we practice a laddering effect, we can now look at the trench is going to be done on the first day. When we dig, right, so when we dig the second length of the trench, we can also lay the pipe, right? So far, so good? So while the total amount of quote unquote personnel we need would be 9 days, we don't have to wait. We can, while the trenching crew is digging the second length of the trench, the pipe crew can lay the first length of pipe. So far, so good? Tiana, does that make sense? Okay. All right. And so then on the third day, while the trenching crew is digging their third trench, the pipe crew is laying the second length of pipe. And the refill crew is covering the first pipe that was laid. So this is day 1. This is day 2. This is what's happening on day 3. But by day 4, the trenching crew is done. They can pack up and go to the next job. The pipe laying crew will be laying the last length of pipe, and the refill crew will be covering the second length. And then by day 5, refill crew is done. So far, so good? Okay. So this particular thing is also how you build a house. Let's say you're in a development and you've got the crew building the slab. So they'll come in and they'll do the earthwork and the dirt work. And then when they're done, they'll move to the next one, and the people who build the slab will build, but the dirt crew is on the second slab, on the second house. Once the slab crew is done, the dirt crew's done, and they move to the third one, the slab crew moves to house number 2, the framing crew comes into house number 1, and so on and so forth. And that's how they can build multiple houses in one day, right? Okay. All right, so slide number 35. We're not going to worry too much about that because I'm going to show you again how to use those lags when we actually put our own piece down, okay? Or do our own network diagram rather. But what we have here, this is this idea of the sequential approach versus the concurrent approach. It's the same thing as the laddering technique that I taught you, right? Where you wait until the product, in the sequential approach, the engineering crew has to wait till the planning is done. The design crew has to wait till the systems are done. Procurement has to wait and that just takes way too much time. Under the concurrent approach, product planning does not have to be finished before the systems engineers can begin. That's why there's an overlap right here. All right. So what that means then is that you can get started even if you only have a part of the information. And that drastically reduces the amount of time it takes for you to do the job. Okay. So we'll skip slide 38 as well. We don't really need that one. And not that one either. But we do need this one. This is the idea of that Hammock activity that I was telling you about. It spans over a segment of a project. The duration is figured out after the network diagram is done, after everything is already put. You figured out your critical path and everything else, and then you say, okay, this Hammock activity can be done at anywhere else, right? This is where you put your indirect project costs. And remember, indirect project costs are those that if you were not doing the project, you would still have to pay them. These are things like the project manager's salary and things like that. So the general and administrative are the ones that if you weren't doing the project, you'd still have to pay them. All right. So here's an example, right? The Hammock activity would go from B to F, and it just spans the entire project here. Okay. All right. So questions, comments, or concerns, right? I didn't mean to even put that one in there. That slide doesn't matter. All right. Okay. Questions, comments, or concerns? All right. Okay. So if we don't have any more questions, right, can you go back to the key term so I can screenshot it? All right. So that's where I'm at now, right? You got that? Okay. Now remember that this lecture is going to be recorded, right? And I'm going to put it on the lecture part of this. I'm going to put as a video underneath, right, the actual activity here. All right. So I'm going to put it under modules, and then this will be under planning, slides and videos, and I will put it right here. Okay. Recall also that you have 1, 2, 3 other videos that you can take a look at. And so each of those videos will help to enhance your understanding of the material. You got me? All right. Do we have any other questions or comments about this particular thing? I'm going to open it up to comments otherwise in just a moment. But do we have any comments about developing a project plan as far as your test goes right now? All right. Do we have any questions? Okay. All right. So I'm going to stop recording, and then I'm going to leave the last 5 minutes here